Welcome to Space Ghost Live. I'd like to introduce my lovely assistant, Jan, and my co-host, Rip the Monkey. Say hello, Rip. All right, now my first guest tonight is a video game designer and artist. He has worked for such companies as Bally and Midway, and he is known for the game Rampage. Now, Rampage was a success that set arcade earning records, and it was eventually ported to more than 25 different platforms and is still prominently featured in Midway arcade compilations for current systems. Please give it up for Brian Colin. Greetings, yes, right here, sir. Thank you very much. Good to meet you. Wonderful to meet you. Welcome to the show. Have a seat.
Oh, thank you.
There we go. Our lovely assistant, Jan, everybody.
Let's hear it for Jan.
Okay, so how'd you enjoy your trip in today?
Actually, I came in yesterday and I enjoyed it very much.
Very good, very good. Cool. So where do you hail from, sir?
I'm in the Chicago boonies, outside about 30 miles south of Chicago, and we've got a nice little wooded acre, and it's cold in the winter and humid and hot in the summer, and
so you get it all
there. Yeah,
it's a lovely variety.
Yes.
All right. So now you have worked in video games since the early '80s, and during that time you worked on some pretty incredible titles. Can you please give us some of the highlights of those titles?
The highlight of Rampage is R. The highlight of Discs of Tron is D and T. You want me to be more specific than this?
Okay. Tell us some of the more iconic games that you've worked on.
The games I'm best known for from those days are the games that I was lucky enough they were letting us do whatever we wanted for the most part, and we had to push a little bit, but the games I'm known best for are the games I designed, like Rampage, like Xenophobe, games like Swackery, which nobody's heard of, but Arch Rivals, Pigskin, those are the games I'm probably best known for. And every one of those games relied on humor and head-to-head competition to, you know, just kind of bring out the most fun in what was a social gaming experience of the day, the arcade.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay. Now you and your team has received a number of awards and honors over the years. But the one we found most surprising was your introduction to the White Castle Hall of Fame. So my question to you, sir, is how did that happen?
I am in the White Castle Hall of Fame with a couple of co-workers, Bobby LaReza and Bob Montgomery, and we were working with a new game engine, and I was trying to figure out what it could do. Are we going to be able to do some games with this? And I said, okay, so let's make some iconic buildings to start with, because that was kind of the weaker side of the engine, and I'm thinking I'm going to get Eiffel Tower, you know, Big Ben, you know, this kind of stuff. I come back over a few hours later and they've got a slider. You know, they've got a slider sitting there on the screen in the environment. And I said, okay, fine. And they grabbed a little goblin we had from another game, and somebody else made some little floating sliders floating around the thing. And before you know it, 2 days later, we had this goblin running around grabbing sliders, and because that was one of the first early years of that promotion. We sent it off to White Castle, and boy, I mean, my wife choked up when they brought us to Ohio, brought us to the little hallway off the restrooms where on the wall was a plaque with my name on it and Bobby's name on it and Bob's name on it, and she broke down. She broke down. It was just, that's gonna be there forever. Ray, am I kidding, Ray? I am not kidding. That is actually true. It was one. They were wonderful. They were fun people. And yes, I am in the White Castle Hall of Fame.
Well, that's got to be pretty good. That's awesome. That's awesome.
How did you dig that out.
Well, we have a specialized team coming up with these questions here. All right, so now, Rampage, tell me about that.
Rampage.
How did it get started?
Rampage was kind of they told me we couldn't do something. So when someone tells me I can't do something naturally, how can we get that to happen? And Rampage, I've told the story a million times. Very briefly, they said we can't do background animation because the hardware would only move rectangles. So I looked at Sharon, the other artist at the time, and said, okay, a building collapsing into itself is animating rectangles. So that's where Rampage came from. The whole part of knocking buildings down and getting rid of urban blight gave me a chance as an artist to make bigger characters so you can see the comedy in their faces, because I'm always about people enjoy games more if they laugh, and more importantly, they'll put it in another quarter if they laugh. So that, it all kind of came together. And you know, when I was a little kid, we did not have these things called video games. I had sandboxes, and you make sand castles. And when you're done with a sand castle, and you've filled it with your army men, there's only one thing to do, is to stand up and stomp your sandcastle back into the sandbox. So that's pretty much everything as succinctly as I can wrap it up.
So yeah, it's, well, when we were little, we used to do paper cities, Godzilla, and would stomp on everything.
Ooh, that's good.
So I can identify. Identify. Build and destroy. That seems to be our medium. So that's terrific. So George, Lizzie, and Ralph.
Yes.
How did you go about naming these monster protagonists of Rampage?
George just struck me. Mice of Men. George. I figured George was not too bright. Lizzie she was a lizard. That's a given. And then my partner Jeff Nauman liked the name Ralph. So, and in fact, if you look at the opening of the game, in the old game, when the computer feed spills out and shows the little picture of the human people, I'm George, my wife Ray was Lizzie, and Jeff Nauman, the programmer and co-designer, was Ralph. So, there you go. If you want to see what I looked like 30 blah, 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 years ago, that's exactly what I look like.
That's terrific. So you're a fan of Mice and Men?
Oh yes, absolutely.
So, yes, I love that film. Now you're a fan of the original with Burgess Meredith, or?
Yeah. Oh yeah. No. Yeah. The first. Yeah.
That one's my favorite. Yeah. That one's my favorite.
Yes.
There was a remake that was done.
Yeah, with
Gary
Southern
Sinise
Illinois and
John Malkovich. Which was interesting.
Big shout out to anybody here from Benton, Illinois. That's what I thought. Okay. But John Malkovich is. And that was a good movie, but the first was the
first one's classic.
Yes.
I mean, actually, and for those that don't know, Burgess Meredith played the Penguin on the original Batman series back in 1966. And it was also, he was the son of the man of 1,000 faces.
Lon Chaney.
So yes, Lon Chaney Jr. Lon Chaney Jr., famous for The Wolfman, was the one who had the wonderful role of Lenny, and he did an amazing job with that. So
yes, he did.
So well, that's great. It's nice to know that's where the history of that came from. So aside from now, Rampage has taken on quite a life of its own, hasn't it?
It has. We did the first one, and then later we left and formed our own company, and the new Williams Valley Midway asked us to come back and do a game that would appeal to a broader demographic. And Rampage always had little kids reaching up and playing and with their parents, and so we said, let's redo Rampage. They loved the idea. So Rampage World Tour, the sequel, the remake actually, had a lot more depth. We could have a lot more fun with it. We did both of those arcade games. And since then, I couldn't even begin to tell you how many anybody know how many different Rampages were out there? There are at least a half dozen remakes where they just keep adding more characters and more characters and more characters.
Yeah, but yeah, that's been around for like what? Because it was what year did it come out?
About 85 is when we did it, so it came out end of 85, early 86, and then we did the sequel around the 94, 95, something like that.
So we're looking at
It all
30,
blurs.
30
It all
years
blurs
it's
these
been around.
days.
That's quite an accomplishment to have something.
It's wonderful. It's wonderful to come to shows like this and hear people firsthand remember what it did to them, meant to them as children.
What it did to them? You want to clarify that?
We caught a lot of grief for that. I mean, that game was the first video game in which there were fully naked people on. When you change back into a human, I mean, you were only 4 pixels across, so I defy you to find something, but you were naked, and we got grief for that. I mean, you could eat your friends. We got grief for that too. So I'm glad that it didn't really break a generation, because at the time there was a lot of, this is horrible, this is violent. But really it was an environmental statement. That's what it was. I came a child at college in the 70s. Urban blight was freaking me out, there's too much. What's the solution? There you go. Let's knock down these buildings.
So now, in knocking down the buildings, you were describing earlier in creating the game, that you said that they said you couldn't do it,
right?
And so it was your goal to take what technology you had at the time to start knocking down buildings, and then you also said that when you were a kid you were knocking down sandcastles and such. So, but where exactly did the inspiration for the game come from? Was it from that childhood memory of knocking down sandcastles?
The thematic inspiration, yes, was being a kid. What's fun? Destroying stuff. But the actual inspiration for the game came from them saying, no, you can't do this with this hardware. So it's like, we can figure out a way to do this. We can figure out a way to do this. So. And then the selfish part as an animator, wanting to make bigger figures so I could see their faces. So it was a combination of things. It was a combination.
Well, I can identify with that. I was kind of the same as a child. That my parents would tell me I couldn't accomplish something. First they said you're lazy, and then they said, but when you want to do something, you stick to it till it's done. Because they would tell me I couldn't do something, and that ended up being the very thing I had to do. So when they said I couldn't be an intergalactic crime fighter, well, then there you go. There you have it. This is what you can achieve. All right. Okay. So, now, with the success of Rampage, there has been some talk that there is a movie in production. So, what can you tell us about that? And by chance, would the casting directors be looking for an intergalactic crime fighter?
I've got a relationship, a very special relationship with the producers. I've contacted them dozens of times, and they have, as yet, they're holding back before they actually get in touch with me. So I'm figuring it's because they're waiting for the film premiere or something like that. But actually, I know nothing really inside about it. The game was picked up by a group about 5 years ago. Every few years they've said it's about to start. Some people know that last year Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson attached to it, so it really looks like it might happen. It was supposed to start filming this summer, but just about a month ago they announced that it's going to start filming next spring. So it's still in the works. Carlton Hughes and a couple of great script writers are working on it. Again, I offered to help. They've not yet reached back to me. I did want to take I want to be proactive though, in case they asked me to do a cameo. I wrote Stan Lee and said, I've never done this kind of thing before. If they asked me to do a cameo, would you play me in the cameo? And like all the other Hollywood people I've dealt with, he hasn't answered me either, so.
Actually, I've heard that Stan Lee is planning his immortality. He's already filmed multiple endings to future films to be produced, so that way they can just start pulling cameos of him from a file and just slip them in. Maybe that's something you might want to plan
That's a
for the
great
sequel.
concept.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
So, all right. So, now what are some of the other titles that are well known that you've done besides Rampage?
Well, arcade titles for this group. My first game I ever worked on was Discs of Tron, which is the sequel to Tron. I worked on games like Demolition Derby and Sarge with Jeff Nauman, programmer, who would later become my partner at Game Refuge. Worked on, we said Rampage. Games like Swackery, which very few people, it's a very rare game because they only produced like 177 of them. I worked on, one of the great things about working in those early days is I worked on everything. Our programmers worked on one project. Artists got to do this on this project, this on this project, this on this project. So I worked on basically everything that came out of Bally Midway that was developed internally for 10 years. I got to work on Spy Hunter. I got to, admittedly, not everything we worked on we probably should have worked on. I worked on Patooey Louie. You guys have never heard of Patooey Louie because it was a giant red pterodactyl with a bikini-clad cave woman on his back who threw boomerangs while the bird spit watermelon seeds at giant invisible killer bees. Which sounds like it should be a slam dunk, right?
Happens to me every day.
I think in where you come from, it would have done much better than it did here.
Just another day at the office.
Yeah, no, that one right into the toilet. I've got about 90 titles under my belt today. But I've been doing this for 35 years in February. And, there's been some that are very well recognized and some that, you wish you'd never touched. But those are the highlights of the arcade years. Arch Rivals, of course, Pigskin, Star Trek Voyager, I think was until this year where I just worked on another arcade game, so we're coming full circle. Star Trek Voyager was our last arcade game. That was about 10 years ago, so worked on a lot of games.
That's wonderful. Well, it sounds like you have had a very extensive career and a very successful one at that.
It's been fun. In a word, it's been fun.
Oh, well, that's wonderful. Well, Mr. Colin, I do want to appreciate you coming here on the show and talking with us today. It has been a total joy, and I do hope you will come back and visit us again real soon.
I'd love to come back.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much, sir.